Hi everyone, it's Angus Campbell here, Monday the 12th of March. Today we're carrying on with Fury SS considerations, and as a lot of you may appreciate, when restoring fairly scarce machines where certain parts may be relatively unobtainable, then Swapsies come into play in a significant way. So what I'm doing today is just accumulating some parts from stock and from the bikes that I have in the garage here to enable a friend of mine who's building up a Fury also to measure these up so he can create patterns, and in return for that you know, he provides me with certain parts that I require. So for instance, for my motor build, I'll need a auto advance mounting stud that goes into the end of the cam, which I don't have. Fairly straightforward piece, but one that provides some stiffness to stop the auto advance mechanism flexing under load and therefore it's affecting the timing. But simple things like that. So today what I'll be doing, as I say, is just accumulating about half a dozen parts. So let's have a quick look at those and where they are. So the first thing is that on the Fury and the Bandit, the auto advance mechanism was unique in that the advance angle, I think, was only 7% off the top of my head, and also the way that the auto advance backplate mounts onto the cam via a spindle was unique as well, in that it doesn't use a taper, it uses a peg. So they're fairly unique, so we'll be dismantling that underneath the points cover there on the end of the cam. So that's the first piece. Second piece, moving over to the Fury SS, is that a fairly scarce part is this small part here, loosely mounted at the moment, but that is the main stand stop, so that it doesn't bash on the other side of the engine or on any other components. A very simple part, but that's the only one I've ever seen, and I was lucky enough to acquire that with respect to the stash of parts that I bought from an associate some time ago that I mentioned in the last video. Then what we'll have, moving it over to the Show Fury. Show Fury seat. There's the Show Fury itself and the seat. So it's like got a garden gate latch on it, common with all the other models in the 71 range, most of them anyway. And here you can see underneath the seat you've got the electrical plate next to the oil tank filler. And then you've got a, on the right there, you've got a black tool tray. Extremely rare, but we've got some made up from that because this one isn't in very good condition, but is the original one. And underneath the tool tray is the battery tray. So what we have to do is just pull the tool tray off. Might have to remove the HT leads there to do that, because that's how they came on this Show Fury, just draped across the top of that tool tray, and with a couple of slots on the far end of the tool tray as well for them to go through. Cannot believe that they ever intended to do that if this bike was ever manufactured, but I think that was just a temporary way of doing it for this bike, which was built for the press launch in November 70 at the Royal Lancaster Hotel. So let me just remove those HT leads in that tool tray, and we'll look in there to see if there is a battery strap and the battery strap hook, because I can't remember actually, it's a while since I've been in here. Well, there you go, good news. There is a strap, and there is an original hook as well. Doesn't look to me to be the same shape as the one that's drawn in the parts book. We'll have a look at it. But anyway, it's there, still in good condition as well, zinc plated, no rust on it. So we'll just remove that gently from the original strap, and we'll put it with the other parts. And here you can see at the bottom of the Show Fury motor, looking down the left-hand down tube, you can see at the bottom of that, in the light, we've got the oil pressure warning light switch on its cap that covers the oil filter cartridge, and behind that we've got the tacho cable, which in this on this bike is grey, and believe it or not has been painted grey originally for the show. Underneath it's black, but it was painted grey, and that's the original one. So as you can see, there's no rubber cap on the oil pressure switch, but there should have been originally, and no doubt that perished at some point. I am pretty sure that I may have removed it at one point before it fell to pieces, and I've got it stored somewhere, but as I've done some tidying up recently when building some shelves, obviously I can't remember where I put it, but I'll no doubt have a look around. And you might be able to see that better still down there. Sorry about the light, but you can't see it actually. Where is it? Roughly round about down there is the no, you can't see it too well, so apologies for the quality, but down there is the oil pressure warning light switch, and you can see I've got already a rubber cover on that, which is just an A65 part, but which fits, but which has an angled exit for the wire, which I don't think it did have on the original Fury, but it still works very well and keeps the elements away. So other than that, I'll get cracking just disassembling those parts. Oh yeah, one other part is on the E35SS engine that I'm building up for myself, that's sort of semi-built. In the first build itself, we have here a spacer that sits between the two arms of the cam chain tensioner, which slopes down here, which you can't see very well on here, but the tensioner slipper face slopes down there, and this is the mounting up here. And this spacer, although you can make up a fairly simple spacer, this spacer is cast aluminium and in a very unique shape, and that's because it also holds on behind there. You can just see there's a plate, and that's the cam retaining plate to prevent the cams from pulling out that way and moving. So it has a dual purpose in nature, really. One, to prevent the cam chain tension from being compressed, and the second then is to hold the cam mounting plate, the cam securing plate as well. So there's that too. So I think that's about it. Get cracking, and this is in preparation for a visit by my friend tomorrow, so he can measure up these parts and if necessary take resin moulds, but also as well he might bring one or two goodies for me. As I say, there's the Auto Advance cam backplate mounting stud, which I don't have, could be replicated easily enough. And also he's in the process at the moment of making some bucket tappets, which again I don't have, and possibly some valve springs too. So yeah, there's a handful of us that keep in touch with one another and do each other favours when we can, and it's quite a nice way of doing it. Okay, I'll get cracking and get these bits and pieces de-installed, as it were, and then we'll have a look at them on the bench. Okay, just while I was at it, I thought I'd show you a close-up of the Auto Advance and the points on the back plate, with some proper light behind it, just to give you an impression, and also this will give me a bit of a record of the position of it as well. As I say, the auto advance is actually located via a peg, so that the position of that is always secured in the correct position. But what you've got to ensure then that because the points backplate has adjustment on that, then to make sure that we put the backplate in exactly the right position. So I'll be doing a bit of fiddling about, but there we have it. The first thing a lot of people will say is, well, why don't you use electronic ignition, because that would make things a bit easier, and the answer is maybe, but I've been caught out a couple of times with breakdowns with electronic ignition units failing, and maybe you know I've just had some bad experiences, but I run all my bikes, including the Rocket 3, on points. I time them up with a strobe, so they're absolutely spot on, and I never have any trouble with them at all. As long as you do the usual routine maintenance with these, clean them up occasionally, they've always been reliable for me. And I ran a Hurricane on points for 18 years, never had one problem. So that's far from the forefront of my mind with respect to this type of mechanism for the ignition. While I'm here, there's a much better view there of the rubber boot that goes over the top of the oil pressure warning light switch that you can see behind the tacho cable there. And as I say, that's just one that I ordered, which is a standard A65 one, which fits as, whoops, sorry about the shadow, as the oil pressure warning light switches that are the same dimensions. And looking over at the Show Fury, it hasn't got one, but I'm sure it did have one, and I've put it away safely somewhere, so I'll have to try and dig it out. But I thought you might be interested, at least to get a good view of that in the front of the motor. Underneath that oil pressure switch, you can see there's like the casting is fairly cylindrical, and that's because there's the full flow oil filter under there, the cartridge, and then underneath the cartridge is the actual rotary oil pump itself. And you know, with respect to this engine, and even the Rocket 3 as well with rotary oil pumps, then there is a non-return valve with a ball and spring, and they don't work. We've checked the tension on the spring, make sure it's clean, make sure the ball's in good condition, the seat's clean, etc. And both this Bandit and my Rocket 3 have similar problems in that they wet sump when stood for any period of time. So there's a bit of oil coming out of this at the moment because it's no doubt all its oil is actually in the sump. But that's easy enough to resolve, and if you're using and running the bikes fairly regularly, like I do with the Rocket 3 over the winter, just to keep the battery charged, etc., then it's not a problem. But when something like this Bandit is stood for a length of time over winter, then the full tank will dump itself into the crankcase. You'll see as well there's some yellowing, which looks like an oil leak from somewhere, and in fact this is it's a petrol leak. So as I say, I only got this bike back from the owner as a favour in the autumn, and it's apparent that that fuel tap there under the tank has been leaking fuel over the cam chain cover and leaking down onto the cylinders there, which is why it's that yellowish colour, because this is running Duckham's oil, which is green, so it's definitely drying up and evaporating petrol. Okay, there we are with the parts deinstalled that are required for measuring up. So here we've got the main stand stop, the battery strap hook, There's the spacer for the cam chain tensioner. That's the gear change quadrant, and then we've got the auto advance unit with its nut and washer. And the washer, in fact, is quite interesting itself, as I hadn't appreciated that. One, it's very thick, but two, it has a taper on one side, and what that does is that taper mates with a reverse taper on the end. You can see it there, on the end of the shaft in the centre of the auto advance unit, which is also slotted, and basically that will then compress that onto the spindle slightly, you would have thought. So interesting, something that I hadn't really appreciated before when I installed it. Needless to say, you have to get that washer on the right way around. So there we go, parts ready for a visit tomorrow to measure up, and hopefully we'll see some Swapsies, and I'll video that at the time if I get his consent to do that. Okay, everyone, so we got so engrossed in reviewing parts, measuring them up, and also preparing them for moulding, etc., that in the end we didn't actually video all the deliberations. But here are a couple of pics from the kitchen table. Always the best use of the kitchen table. And initially, here are the parts that he wanted to review, analyse and measure up. And also there you see a side stand and a set of valve springs in the bag, which he brought for me to swap in return for, so firstly providing certain parts for him to analyse and measure up, and secondly we do swap parts as well. In the second photo, just a bit of a higher level view of industry and activities in the kitchen. But I'll go back to the garage and show you some of the outcome of these deliberations and the efforts to mould certain parts, and you'll be able to see then what ultimately we were up to, as well as getting drawings and fine measurements. Okay, so what we wanted to do was create a mould of a couple of the parts, and as you can see, the parts in question, i.e. in this case the cam chain tensioner spacer, which is this part here, cast aluminium, there it is, and also over here on the bench the main stand stop. You can't see it too well, but it's there. It goes on the inside of this mounting bolt for the left-hand engine plate. Those two parts we wanted to create a mould of, so my friend could recreate these and basically cast some more effectively. So what he did was create some I think it was resin based mould, but it turns out more of a rubbery solution, and so all he did was place the two parts into just an ordinary margarine tub, mix up some of the resiny solution with a catalyst, and pour it in and let it set with the two parts in question just lying in the bottom. And then what we've ended up afterwards then is, once this is set, then we end up with the set rubber with some original solid pieces in, just to give it some rigidity, and then we've just split it down the centre, and all you can see very basically at one end of this are thin remnants of where the parts were lying on the bottom. But if you turn it over, then if you put this mould back together and fill the cavities with some form of, again, resin, you'll end up with two copies, albeit in resin, but enable you, but good patterns, correctly sized patterns in the correct shape to enable you to create then your metal patterns from that. Similarly, what he also did while he was here is made an awful lot larger mould of the seat base. He already had the seat base impression itself, which is there, but it needed some additional rigidity. And while he was here, we married this up with the seat that I've got there on the SS, as that's not fixed on at the moment. We found that it was a correct copy from the original pan that he used to initially create this, and all he wanted to do was on the other side just add more resin, put in some raw materials and some rods and everything. It looks an absolute dog's dinner, but it does the trick because it's now given this a lot more rigidity. Still a little flexible, but at least now it'll keep its shape and enable, you know, another copy of this from you know, reverse molds, etc., to enable a seat pan to be made up. So there we are. Interesting afternoon as usual. Always takes longer than anticipated. But what happened was that we effectively have done each other some favours again, swapped some parts, and what I've ended up with on this visit is sort of set of valve springs, because I've got all sorts and manner of different springs, but none of them are labelled, and therefore I couldn't be sure of the length of the spring, the size of the spring, the tension of the spring, etc., of the items that I've got loosely in stock. And so he's kindly given me a set of those, and also what he's been diligently working on is recreating the original side stand, which again is a unique shape to the Fury. And what we did was we used the Show Fury, nestling at the back there, the Show Fury original part, again to create a mould from which we then he then created a casting, made up several copies of that, and you'll have seen that in the original images of when we were working on the table. As it's in black. I've now started to paint this up in dove grey. Needs a bit of a rub down and a few more coats, but it's coming out okay. Actually, that's not too bad, and that's obviously much better than the original intention I had of using a side stand from A35s, which will actually fit and do the trick, and that's what we've actually used on the Bandit. That's got an A65 stand, side stand down there. You can't see it too well, but it's tucked in, and that works actually quite well. But it's not actually the correct shape. It's a bit heavy, but there we are. That was the Swapsy day over. So we continue to make progress. As I said before, I've installed that part back in. And what we're doing now, next stage on this project, is at the moment I've just been refitting the cams to ensure they run smoothly, which they do. Also checking the oil ways, since we had to complete the oil way drilling on this head, and that's now That's now complete and has been successful. So the oil feed is complete up to the cams and the drain back. The next thing on this head is cams out, and you can't see it from here, the head's fitted, but in there you can't actually see it, to be honest, underneath the cams. Then the cavities for the tappet buckets need to be machined, also the holes for the valve guides, and in the head itself the domes need to be finished and valve seats put in as well. But that's not too bad a job really for, you know, an accomplished engineering company. It should be able to turn that okay, and we've got full-size drawing anyway, so that's not too bad a job. And the next thing is that there's some gearbox clearance issues down at the bottom, which is why we've taken the gearbox out, and there's the gearbox inner and outer cover, and all the internals nestling in the primary chain cover at the moment. So we're just doing a bit of a refitting and tidying up of that, because there was a slight clearance problem, and a couple of bearings were in the wrong way round and not pushed in correctly. So again, that's fairly straightforward. So once we've done that, we'll then get on to completing the primary drive side, including completing the starter drive now, as we've got all the parts too. So that's fairly straightforward. But the biggest job, which will take a little while, is sending the head away to get that actually completed from a machining perspective. And then that first build will be complete, and then it'll be a complete strip, clean up all the parts, and then do a final build. And obviously I'll be filming all of that work, and that's carrying on interspersed with bits and pieces on the A70 Lightning over there, and I'll just do a separate update on that soon. So I think that's all for now on the Fury SS. That's the next stage. Thanks very much for watching, everybody, and see you all again soon. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.